Hello. I said in an earlier video that I was going to look at a number of expressions, concepts, phrases that are commonly used in educational research reports that I find confusing and confused. I find them confusing to me because I'm not absolutely clear what they mean, and I think that it's not entirely my fault. I think they are a bit confused, or they are trying to cover a breadth of meaning that is so wide that very many different and conflicting interpretations are possible. So I want to do another one of those clarifying of concepts videos, and on this occasion I cannot pass by the expression decolonisation. Now, decolonisation is obviously a good thing because it's colonisation and it's whatever the opposite of colonisation is. So let's begin with colonisation. And I'm not speaking in defence of colonisation. I know that colonial powers did terrible, terrible things. I know that many people, some people on behalf of those colonial powers did terrible things, and those terrible things included violence to native languages. Now, nobody needs to explain that to me. I live and work in Wales, and if I go to the Museum of Welsh Life, there's a 19th century schoolroom, and I can go to the schoolroom, and there, hanging on the wall over the teacher's desk, is the Welsh knot. Now, the Welsh knot might have just been a piece of rope, or it might have had a board on it with some message on it, normally a rude message about a pupil who'd been caught speaking Welsh, and if they were caught speaking Welsh, they had to wear this around their neck for the rest of the day, and probably suffer some other punishment as well. So a violent and oppressive effort was made to wipe out the indigenous language of Wales. Fortunately, it failed. The people of Wales resisted and refused to let go of their language altogether, and nowadays more and more people are learning Welsh in order to recover their heritage. But the Welsh knot, to me, is a symbol of that ridiculous attitude that colonisers had, that you had to be able to speak the language of the... Not that you wanted to speak it because you wanted to join in commerce, not because you wanted to learn it because you wanted to speak to other people, but you had to learn it for some reason that more or less escapes me. So let's not pretend that terrible things weren't done about colonisation. Worse things than that were done, clearly. I'm not defending colonisation, but decolonisation actually comes from a slightly different place. There was an idea that took hold in the 1960s, 1970s, perhaps earlier than that, perhaps 1948, when George Orwell wrote his novel 1984. And one of the premises of the book is that if you can remove from the language certain words, people will not be able to say certain things. So that was the whole behind the story of what happens in the Ministry of Truth with people editing the history of the country, behind what happens with NGSOC, where people are being taught that words have particular specific meanings and they can only be used in a particularly ideological way in order to remove certain meanings. Language is clearly important in how we can express ourselves. And the reason 1984 captures the imagination so wonderfully is because there's a grain of truth in it. There's a grain of truth, but that grain of truth then took root in the 1960s with the idea that the language you have constrains what you can say, and if it constrains what you can say, you can think, so that rather than when we speak a language, when we have a vocabulary and a grammar, we might talk of the discourse, the kind of conversations that we have, the realms of issues that we can cover, the realms of meaning that we can convey easily to other people. And the original idea of this is that we speak the discourse. But in the 1970s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, we began to get the idea that the discourse so constrains what people think and say that you can say that the discourse speaks through us. And that's quite a big shift. It says that I'm only able to say things that my language allows me to say. And there's kind of an interesting truth even there behind that. Let's go back to the Welsh example again. There are some words in Welsh which are very difficult to translate. One of the words I think of is cwtch. The word cwtch in Welsh, it means a cuddle, it means a warm feeling, a physical closeness to people, sitting next to somebody. It's not sexual or invasive, it's just that comfortable feeling of sitting in close physical proximity with people that you know and like, and it also means a place where you might sit to do that. You might think of a comfortable sofa, a cwtch, a small room that's comfortable, warm and cosy. I suppose in English the closest we've got to that is a snug. So the snug bar in a pub was somewhere where you went for private conversations and to be with friends. But I don't think that a snug ever competed with a cwtch. A cwtch is a very friendly sense of being together. There are other words like the word, I'm not even going to try and translate it because my Welsh is so bad, but the word that the Welsh have for, well, it's normally translated as homesickness. But it means that kind of longing that you have when you're a long way from home. And maybe it's a particular cultural thing. The Welsh have it more than other people, they say. So they have a word for it. So I'm not saying that all words are immediately translatable, but I can explain to you in a circuitous way what those words mean, what a cwtch is or what homesickness is, by using a lot of English words. A lot of English words can be used more or less to convey the meaning. So languages are they are translatable, they're not incommunicable between languages. There can be communication between people from different languages if they make the effort. It's not that you're prohibited from saying some things, as was suggested by Orwell and by discourse theorists in the 1960s and 1970s. It is that it's more difficult. It's more difficult to do that. Now, it's technically possible that tomorrow I could decide that I was never again going to speak English. I would only speak Spanish. It's not likely, but it could technically happen. And that would mean that there were some things I would find very difficult to say, because there are concepts in English that I have that I find very difficult to express in Spanish because of my lack of vocabulary, my lack of knowledge. On the other hand, there would be gains. I would be able to describe some people as simpatico, which is something, of course, you'd never want to say about an English person, but it doesn't exactly translate as sympathetic, friendly. No, it's something else that's kind of a deeper feeling about it. There's something slightly different about the meaning of the word. So the difficulty is that we are colonized by our language. That's the message that we were getting from this. The language that you have available to you shapes what it is possible to think and say, and that's why colonizers were so anxious to control language, because they thought that they would be able to manage people by imposing a language. I think that's wrong, because as you've seen, even in this short demonstration, by making an effort and using a lot of words, I can try to circumvent the fences that language puts around me. But so here's the thing, we've got colonization, imposition of language, but with it the idea that by imposing a language you impose ways of thinking, and another word that I may have to come back to in a later video that might need some cleaning up or some reflection on. By imposing a language, you kill a way of thinking. There is epistemicide when you impose a language. Well, I'm not sure that's absolutely true, but now let's think what decolonisation implies. Well, it implies I'm going to be freed from the boundaries of language. And how am I going to be freed from the boundaries of language? I'm going to, well, if I say I'm only going to speak Spanish from now on, I've got different boundaries, but they are boundaries all the same. If I, in the even more unlikely event that I say I'm only ever going to speak Chinese or Welsh in the future, I'll still have boundaries, because the language, any language, imposes boundaries to what is easily expressible, what's expressible at all. If you read Newton's work, you see him struggling to create new words for the concepts of acceleration, momentum, kinetic energy, those things that are the concepts that are used to manage and understand motion. He has to practically invent them, because the only one that existed, the only word that existed for motion up to that time was motion. He had to start to clarify the concepts. Now, decolonisation, if it means being released from the imposition of somebody else's language, I'm all in favour of that, but I think decolonisation is being used somehow slightly differently to say that if we could escape from all language, if we could find a way of expressing ourselves without language, we could become truly free. What would be involved in not being bound by the boundaries of language? And that, to me, is a parallel, a similar argument. Archimedes said if you gave him a long enough lever, he was, after all, developing the theory of levers, give me a long enough lever and I will be able to move the earth. And what he meant was long levers allow you to exert a small force out here and you get a very large force over there. Interesting and exciting statement of what he was trying to explain, but it omits two things. He needs to have somewhere to stand, and he needs a fulcrum to rest his lever on. So in order to be outside of the earth and move the earth with a long lever, you have to have somewhere to stand. And that's the same issue, that if we decolonise language to the extent of getting rid of all language, if we get rid of all language, there is nowhere outside language where we can discuss educational research or anything else for that matter. We need a language in order to be able to discuss the topics that we're looking at. So I can choose tomorrow to speak only Spanish and never to speak English again. I can choose who colonises me. I can choose the discourse of which I will be a part and that will shape and constrain my thinking, but I can't do without language altogether. well, I can do without language altogether, but then I have to stop speaking and have to stop having social dealings with anybody at all. So everybody, and claiming the high ground, as I think decolonisers are claiming the high ground that they can see something beyond language, I think that's not true. I think that everybody's constrained by language. And I've said, as an adult, here and now, I can say, I choose who will colonise me. I choose whether I will be colonised by the discourse of English, or I choose whether I will be colonised by the discourse of Spanish. But I didn't have that choice when I was 6 months, 9 months, a year old. I was colonised by my parents and the language my parents thought I should learn. And at this point, I cannot choose to be decolonised. I can choose whose colonisation I accept, but I cannot choose to be decolonised. So I think there's a whole realm here of meaning that needs to be unpacked. Yes, colonisation was dreadful in terms it was violent imposition on other people of something they didn't want. Thank goodness it's ending, or it's ended. Colonisation in terms of language adoption is a different issue, and people adopt English, or they adopt French, or they adopt what's called a world language voluntarily, or a national language that's not their mother tongue. People adopt those languages all of the time simply because they want to talk to other people. So this word colonisation carries a lot of emotional baggage with it, and putting it the opposite of it, decolonising it, this has a really happy space. But what does it really mean in practical terms? And I hope that when you come across the word decolonisation, decoloniality in future, you will at least stop and think, what's implied here? What actually is happening here? What's the message beyond the emotional message I'm getting? What's the content that I'm actually being given in the word decolonisation?